I would like to introduce our Vice Chair and Board Member, Heather Desjardins, just to kick us off today. So Heather, thanks for coming, and I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, Glenn, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. It's my pleasure, Mayor of Middletown today, Ben Florsheim. Ben, I'm going to ask you to help me pronounce your last name. I think I might have just butchered it.
That's okay. Florsheim, you were close.
Florsheim, thank you so much. So we are so excited to have you join. This series right here is our Youth Mentor series. And really it's meant to inspire, for us to learn, for us to really gather as a community. You're never too young or too old to be a youth mentor. And these are our next leaders of the world that's going to come in, that's getting ready to really come out into the world. Joining us today is 28-year-old Mayor of Middletown, Ben. And I just love your story, Ben. You moved to Middletown in 2010 to become a student of Wesleyan University, growing up in the Midwest in the Rocky Mountains. And what I read, really, what I learned about you was your curiosity about politics. Super cool story about the first year of you being in your freshman year, walking down Main Street to visit the Democratic headquarters and to see if you can get involved. And boy, did you get involved, Ben, at quite a deep level. So I am so thrilled to introduce you to the community, and we're honored to have you, Ben. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm excited for the conversation, and thanks to everybody for taking the time out on a beautiful day. And I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, that I'm actually 29, and I have to say I saw it on the materials. I saw 28 years old listed on all the materials, and I was like, yeah, I'm 28. That sounds right. Which is sort of the state of this, that's the mental state that you're in after a year and a half of being mayor and governing during a pandemic and myriad other crises. So, but I'm thrilled to be here, and it's my mistake for not actually realizing how old I was and correcting that sooner.
This is a great mistake. I wish someone would confuse me for being 28. That never happens these days. So it's actually a good mistake to have. But I love when we so often talk, have guests on here. We really sometimes we talk about, their hero's journey and their journey to get them here. So I thought maybe we can just learn and get to know a little bit more about you, Ben, and kind of tell us a little bit about your journey. This is really a relaxed forum. So we'll just kind of kick it off, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Think of this kind of as a fireside chat, minus the fire and minus us sitting next to each other for now anyway. So I'm really interested to learn more about what brings you and what's led you right here, right now, Ben. Talk a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, as you said, Heather, I'm not originally from Middletown or from Connecticut. I grew up I spent most of my childhood in Salt Lake City, Utah, where my dad was a professor at the University of Utah, and we wound up out there when I was very little. And when I was in high school, we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where my dad was originally from, and his extended family was all there. And so spent a couple of years in the Midwest. But right as soon as I arrived in Milwaukee, I was starting to think about college applications and where I wanted to end up next. And so I applied to way too many schools, and wound up, when the dust settled, sort of choosing between being in New York City, where I thought at the beginning of the process that I wanted to be, or going to Wesleyan in Middletown. And once the decision was actually at my doorstep, I realized I didn't think I did want to be in a big city, or particularly or New York specifically. I thought that I really loved Middletown, and I loved the campus when I first visited, and I really liked the idea of being able to be in a community where I felt like I could make a difference, where I could really get involved, and in a small city of about 50,000 people, with an active sort of a college town feel in one view, or in one part of town, but also an incredible diversity of different types of community throughout the whole city. It was really appealing for that reason. And Wesleyan wound up being the right school for me as well. So but this sort of coincided, that period of my life coincided with when I was first starting to follow and get interested in politics, both in terms of campaigns and elections and in terms of government policy setting and that sort of thing. And I was following the presidential election closely in 2008 when I was wrapping up high school. And once that was over, I was fascinated by all the coverage of it, and then it ended, and then I just kind of kept following the news. I kept following what was happening in Congress. I decided I wanted to learn more, and worked on a Senate campaign, volunteer as a volunteer intern the summer before coming to Connecticut and to Middletown for college. And my boss on that campaign said, you should keep doing that. Like, you should, when you get there, you should try to get involved if you're interested. I think it was summer of 2010, and so I was leaving this campaign, but the election cycle wasn't over. There were elections happening in Connecticut too, and she said, you should try to get involved. And there are some people she knew in common. I'll connect you with some people out there. And that's how that happened, Heather. That story of me winding up at the Democratic headquarters my first week of my freshman year, and it continued to be something that really I was getting a lot out of. That's the best way I can come up with to put it. It was sort of it nourished all the things that I wanted it to. It was allowing me to get to know this new community that I found myself in. It was an interest, an academic interest that I pursued in the classroom. But I've never been somebody who's like particularly satisfied just with the academic version of something or just with the sort of practical version of something. I think it's so important to sort of try to understand both and try to experience both for the things that we care about and that are important to us. So I'm, spending time during the day in history and political science classes and sort of learning about policymaking, and then trying to get some practical campaign experience in the community in Middletown, and getting to know Middletown through that process. And I was ambivalent and remained ambivalent up until I actually did it. And I'm still kind of ambivalent about the question of whether to run for office someday, and whether that was going to be the path that I wanted to go, or whether I would work more behind the scenes, or even whether I would sort of not be in straight politics and government, but doing advocacy or journalism or something along those lines. So, going through that personal journey was an interesting one during college, and after college, I had the great opportunity to go to work for Senator Chris Murphy, who had recently been elected to the Senate at that time after having served in the House of Representatives. And I interned for Senator Murphy in his Washington office, and I did that to sort of see if I wanted to be in Washington or not. And I really enjoyed the experience, but the takeaway was that I wasn't really drawn to being on the Hill, at least at the time that I was there, because I could see that people were working really hard. I could see that people were going there with the best of intentions to try to help their states, help their districts, and fight for good policies. And I could see that was because of the sort of institutional gridlock that had taken over in Congress at that time. It just wasn't happening, and I couldn't see myself being able to keep going to work every day if I knew that I was going to be, doing that sort of Sisyphus and climbing up the hill and then watching the boulder fall down every day. And but I still wanted to try to make a difference, and I still wanted to be involved. And so the opportunity that came to me was to do community outreach for Chris's team in the Connecticut office, working around the state with different organizations, with local governments, with state government, with nonprofits and chambers of commerce and advocacy organizations, to try to make sure that Chris was getting what he needed in terms of information when he's in Washington about what's going on in the state, and then try to make sure that when he's in the state, he's talking to the right people about what he's working on from a legislative standpoint. And that's how I met Glenn. That's how we first got connected, was that we were involved. Senator Murphy was wanting to sort of learn more and get more involved in the startup and entrepreneurial ecosystem in Connecticut. And so I spent some time trying to network in that world, particularly in New Haven, and have known each other since. And that's how I ended up here today. But then a few years on, worked for Chris for 5 years, and the opportunity presented itself to run for mayor in 2019, and it came about. There was an open seat election in Middletown that the incumbent had served for 8 years, and I had worked on his campaigns and decided not to run again. And it was going to be a wide open Democratic primary, and then a former Republican mayor was going to be the challenger in the fall. So we knew it was going to it was a big eventful race, and I had thought for a while that if I did run for office, it would probably be local office, because I saw in my job with Senator Murphy, to the extent that things were not happening in Washington, and things are certainly happening in Washington now, but at that time when things were really not happening in Washington, it was local government where you could really get things done, and do creative things, and try to move the needle for what is happening in your state and in your country. And the scale of it was something that really appealed to me, and the ability to work within community to try to do things for the betterment of that community was really appealing to me. And the more I sort of worked with and saw up close the job that mayors and first selectmen were doing all around the state, the more appealing it was to me. And so we took the leap. It started with conversations amongst progressives in Middletown about who we could recruit to be sort of a progressive candidate on the Democratic side for mayor, and eventually, I started turning in my direction. There were other people who were approached and said, I don't think so. And it was in the back of my mind that it would be something I would like to do, but until somebody else said that I could do it, it was it didn't feel real. It still felt like something maybe in another 4 years that we would try to go for. But we also felt that it was important to have that voice in the race. We thought that there were some good things that we could do, and I really thought that I knew that people were going to be a little bit put off by a young candidate, even though we've elected. I'm certainly not the first young person elected in Middletown, and we'll talk about that dynamic, I imagine, over the course of the time that we have together. But I really thought that I had some experience that I could bring to bear. I thought that I had the right kind of experience for the moment, and that experience was around building coalitions and working collaboratively around issues that were challenging and that often had kind of intractable disagreements around them. That's what I tried to do for Senator Murphy's office, in terms of bringing the actual people doing the work on the ground in Connecticut together around difficult issues that Chris was working on from a policy standpoint in Washington. And that's how we that's how we messaged it during our campaign, and that's how we've tried to govern since we've been in office. And it's been a crazy time to govern. It's been at the same time a really exciting time, because you can see in real time the results that you're getting from the decisions that you're making, and nowhere has that been more true than in dealing with this pandemic, right? Because you in real time are able to see the consequences, good or bad, of the public policy decisions that are getting made. And then just lastly, so before we can sort of jump into this discussion, I think that this is this topic that we're here to talk about, sustainability and the Middletown climate emergency resolution, I think it's such a interesting lens to be looking at it through conscious capitalism, right? I think that the climate crisis that we're in was created by capitalism, and unless capitalism can solve it, then it will destroy capitalism. And so the question that we're here to talk about is how do we make that happen? Can that happen? And I think that there was a little bit of conversation along these lines before we went live here. We're at kind of an interesting moment where, because sustainability has become such an urgent, pressing issue, not just for the sake of the environment, but also for the sake of our economy, of our system, that for once, it's not common that this happens, but for once, a lot of the economic incentives and profitability, those are lining up with the incentives around taking care of the planet and trying to take care of the world. And so what that looks like in reality is you're going to save money by doing things like switching to solar, switching to sustainable energy. It's not a costly luxury. It's something that is actually going to save communities money, whether that's in terms of the rate that you're paying as a homeowner, or the cost to the municipality and the rates that you're going to be paying as a taxpayer when it scales up to the municipal level. And the same thing can be true for state and federal level as well. And we wanted to be on the front lines of that in Middletown, and that's I think what brought us here today. So I'll stop there because I know we've got lots more to talk about. But thanks again for having me.
I love it. Absolutely, Ben. Thank you so much for bringing us really through your journey. And some of the key words, like the ding words that I got all excited about, which is really similar when we talk about a hero's journey to get us here. We talked about you weren't sure if people were going to be put off by your age. And I would just like to say, commend you for it, because the hero's journey is, essentially putting some people off. And that's really what kind of steps them apart from everyone else. And that's what the leaders are born out of. The other thing, and I love that you really took the leap of faith. When I was doing some research, there was a line that you wrote that I just kind of fell in love with. And you said something, I'm going to butcher, hopefully I don't butcher it too much, but, working in public service, if you're sitting behind a desk all day, you're probably not doing your job. And I thought that was really interesting as you connect at a more intimate level with the business leaders and the business community in Middletown, of really being proactive with working with those small business owners in your jobs and economic development. Before we kind of open it up, or maybe this can kind of segue in, I'd love to see how the community is responding to opening back up, and how they're dealing with the pandemic. And then we're going to open it up to the community to begin our conversation. So I'd love to hear kind of the pulse of the community right now, Ben, in the field, as you step away from behind your desk and back into the community.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, little did I know when I said that, of course, that we were all going to be, locked indoors and doing everything in this format. But I was also, over the weekend for this past weekend, for what felt like really the first time in a very long time, I was with friends and colleagues outdoors, and not wearing masks, and being able to feel normal doing that, because we had the CDC guidelines that we were all vaccinated, and that was safe to do. But also it felt a little bit strange, right? In the same way that it felt strange to start doing it in the first place. And the way that people's behavior has been, and our just our way of interacting with the world has been reshaped. I was talking to somebody earlier, and they're saying that it's affecting our conversational abilities. Like it's affecting how we how we react to just being seeing and being close to one another in person. But I would say that the feeling right now is optimism and a cautious optimism because we've been through a really difficult time, and there have been moments throughout the pandemic where we felt like, okay, maybe we're out of the woods now, but it didn't really materialize until we got the vaccine, and we're still facing enormous challenges with that. Middletown has been doing, I think, a phenomenal job when it comes to really throughout the pandemic, but particularly right now when it comes to the vaccine. We have lots of sites set up. Our health department is doing mobile clinics now, trying to get to those hard to reach populations and make it as accessible as possible. And as the weather starts to change, as we head into the spring and the summer, there's more and more opportunity to be together safely. And last summer was just this kind of surreal experience, I think, for most of us, where events that we're used to have happening and just gatherings that we're used to have happening weren't happening. There were still outdoor people were going to the beach and spending time outdoors, but we weren't able to do the second year of our amazingly successful Pride Parade. We weren't able to do, the Memorial Day and the 4th of July fireworks, which attract thousands of people. Those were just obviously not options last year, and they're not really options this year either in that format. But we are still going to celebrate Pride, and it's just going to be with slightly smaller scale events. There will be a virtual parade, and then we're going to do concerts downtown. And those are the types of things that we're really trying to cultivate as a city, to make sure that people have places to go, things to do. There's going to be this real hunger. There is this real hunger to get back to normal, but there's also a sense of hesitancy, like, wait, should I really be doing this? And so trying to create those opportunities is something that we're really focused on, because people are ready, but they're also trying to be safe and trying to not let this get the better of us the way that it has for much of the past year.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. And it's such a benefit when we talk about community and culture within community. I'm personally so grateful for the community of the Conscious Capitalism Connecticut chapter. I mean, we really have an amazing community, and the culture that we've built here has been great. I see some questions coming in on the chat, and I want to just open it up now to the group. If you feel comfortable, please unmute yourself, and let's really kind of dig in and really start the conversation and continue the conversation with Ben. Gavin, I see you had a question there. You want to kick us off?
I like Eleanor's question better.
You can ask my question, Gavin.
Okay, so I guess about the sustainable CT group, because that's our group at Ridgefield's working on that too. We have a bronze thing, so but I see Eleanor's put in the chat that you guys have a silver one. So how's all that going, and how's that working? I guess the other thing too is I want to hear also more about this declaration that you guys made and how that was like working across political spectrum and getting people involved and that kind of thing, because I would have thought that would be a really hot wire to touch. So but throwing it out there.
Yeah, thanks. And really the resolution grew out of the community's commitment to this idea, and that's where that really started. Well, I can't say that it started, but we have in town some very active environmental groups, both city commissions. We have a clean energy task force. We have a conservation commission that handles open space acquisition and management. We have a recycling committee, as well as a full-time recycling coordinator on staff. And so those were things that I inherited when I came into office, and I also inherited the silver designation. So Middletown was what was, I think it may have actually been the first under my predecessor, Dan Drew, was the first city to officially sign up for sustainable CT, and got right to work. And having, again, this sort of, we have also a part-time sort of energy coordinator for the city. So the energy coordinator, the recycling coordinator, and all of those very active volunteer groups were able to work on an application that first year. And that sustainable CT, it's so broad in scope in terms of what they look for, that there were a lot of things that we could already cross off the list as saying, okay, we're already doing this, we're already doing that. We're working on our plan of conservation and development, and we're already going to try to put sustainability initiatives in there. But here, what are some other, what are the other low-hanging fruit that we can try to tackle from sustainable CT? And that got us the bronze certification the first time that we went for it, and then the silver certification the second time. And I think that a lot of factors in our favor were a lot of open space acquisition that we're doing, the fact that we have staff level positions for sustainability in city government, some of our watershed protection efforts that have been happening along the Connecticut River and other waterways and inland wetlands in town. I was fortunate coming into office because as somebody who cares about this issue and who wanted to work on this issue, it's one of those things that I was thinking, there really needs to be strong local leadership around sustainability, and we want Middletown to be a leader. And I was lucky because Middletown already was kind of a leader. They were already out front on a lot of these issues, and we had just signed, just inked a deal to. We purchased all of the light poles in town from Eversource, and had just inked a deal with, as I was coming into office, to replace all of them with LEDs, and so that was obviously a big boost to our sustainable CT score, and that really happened because of the dovetailing relationship between city staff and city boards and commissions. But with all that being said, there was an attitude and a perception amongst those activists, amongst the environmental community in general, that working with city government, that working with City Hall was always a struggle. There was always sort of an uphill climb, and that even though the people on staff, the recycling coordinator and the energy coordinator, were with them 100%, there was a feeling that they were not really that those people weren't really being listened to within City Hall, within city government. It wasn't being made a priority on the level that it should have been. And once I got on the other side of the desk, my impression was kind of twofold. Number one, I started to realize the extraordinary constraints that cities are under, and how thinly spread their resources are in terms of staffing and ability to work with every volunteer organization in town to do what they're doing. And so I started to understand a little bit better, maybe why that perception existed on the outside, but would be differently understood if you kind of knew what was really going on the inside. But on the other hand, I also realized that there was some recalcitrance. There was some inertia that I think is built into all institutions and all governments to do new things, to try new things, especially things that, when it comes to our finance department and our taxpayers and our city council who authorize spending, especially when it comes to things that say there's going to be a little bit of a higher upfront cost, but you're going to start saving money very soon. It's people are reluctant to believe that, and you really have to strongly make the case when it comes to things like, for instance, that LED conversion project, that the upfront cost is worth the savings. Notwithstanding the environmental benefits, that it's worth the savings that you're going to realize. I mean, it's actually just in this past month was the first time we started to see the savings on the energy bill, and it's going to be significant. So I think that those first projects are going to pave the way for more. But that's where the idea of this climate resolution kind of came from. It was I will say it was not my idea. I was very happy to support it once it was proposed to me. But it was the idea was that the council would be able to take action to put something on the books that says this is a priority in the city of Middletown, and regardless of how much X or Y department may want to work on it, it's on the books now. It's not a binding resolution. It doesn't have anything in there that it requires the city to do, other than setting a goal for that waste reduction or the emissions reduction goal for 2030. But it's not prescriptive in how it seeks to achieve that. It's just it's something that I can point to, that the activist community can point to, that the council can point to and say, hey, we passed this. We said we're going to do this. We have to now act in accordance with that. And so it's been a way to kind of light a fire under myself and under the council itself to try to really live up to the standard that we're setting for ourselves. And the way that it came about is it was a councilman who's a Democratic councilman who I'm not sure if he's the oldest person on the council, but he's one of the older members who got a copy of Time magazine with Greta Thunberg on the cover and sort of felt this sense of urgency after we had just come into the council. He had been served on the council before, but had been newly re-elected with me when I was elected, and kind of lit a fire under him to say we have to get some urgency to this. And so it was him working with another councilman, Republican, who is also a young person, is actually a few years younger than me, and who also came in new to the council in 2019. They worked with the Clean Energy Task Force to draft it, and having that bipartisanship and the generational, working together, intergenerational sort of collaboration, I think put us out of the gate on the right note and allowed us to get it through the council without too much trouble when it comes to the political friction that I think is often associated, as you alluded to, Gavin, is often associated with.
It's, one of the things when I first started working, so I've been working in our family business for, 35 years and gotten pretty much to the top of the company. And so I could just say, oh, we're just going to do this thing. And this thing would then just happen, and I was used to that kind of thing. Oh, we're going to buy a new, more efficient air compressor. We're going to spend, $250,000 on it. Boom, wave magic wand, and there's a new air compressor, 6 months later, and I knew that it was going to pay for itself in, X period of time. And then, now being retired and then, joining this group, working with the town, all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's like, I have to like nudge and, suggest things and be patient. And, so I feel that whole thing, of like, all of a sudden it's like, feels slow, much slower. So, I get that, everything, but I do like that, the resolution is sort of like the conscious companies that have like a higher purpose. You state what that purpose is, and then everybody's clear. Look, this is what we're doing. And it's not like it's binding in an individual, specific way, but it sort of gives the green light to like, this is who we are. So this happens. What am I going to do about it? I look at the purpose and go like, well, we're this kind of company. So, this is what I'm going to do, and you can be any level anywhere in the company, and that you are going to be aligned with everybody else. And, if somebody questions you on it and say, well, I looked at the purpose and it said, this is who we are. And, this was in alignment with that. So that's why I did it. Kind of see it from that point of view. It looks really good. So Christia, I think, had a question.
Yeah, I was wondering if you see the resolution as being mainly focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions, since you said it's not legally binding in any way, or if it's not even quite that set in stone, if you haven't really defined it yet.
We kind of haven't really defined it yet, and that is what we're working on now. So the easy part was passing the resolution. The hard part now is trying to live up to it, and we're in the process right now. I mentioned these volunteer organizations that work with the city. they have put together sort of a coalition of themselves, representatives from, one group that works primarily on energy, one group that works primarily on, conservation, land use, that type of thing, and environmental cleanups, one representative for, for recycling initiatives, try to get everybody working together on a policy framework for moving this forward. And we are also now setting up an internal city government working group that is going to have representatives from, we'll have, I'll sort of direct it, and we'll have somebody there from Public Works, and we'll have somebody there from Water and Sewer, we'll have somebody there from our Planning and Economic Development Department. We'll have somebody there for, one of the big things is purchasing, is what types of products are we maintaining sustainable purchasing practices. That's something that Sustainable CT looks at, and it's one of the biggest things that governments and other sort of large institutions need to look at in terms of both cost and impact. So try to get all of the relevant city departments to try to look at some strategies of where we can make an impact. So when it comes to emissions, we haven't sort of set specific guidelines on that yet. I think that as we delve into this kind of next phase of the process, that will be, we have to set goals if we're going to, for all of the open-endedness of the resolution, and it's good that it's open-ended, in order to get from kind of 0 to 1 here, we have to identify some achievable goals, which is what we're going to be working on over the next few weeks.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick follow-up to that?
Please,
do you see like replacing the all of the on-site city emissions infrastructure as like doable by 2030? Like burners, boilers, machinery type stuff.
I think it is probably doable. I say that it's easy to say now, although 2030 isn't really that far away. So it's something that we need to be underway with. We need to be underway with presently. I think it's possible, and I think that I saw, Gavin, you asked in the chat about federal programs, and I think that it just became a lot more possible with the promise of a major federal infrastructure bill that is going to be really oriented towards incentivizing clean energy. And so I think that if we are ready to take advantage of those programs that are hopefully going to be coming down the pike from Washington, if we have our ducks in a row when money starts flowing, in particular, that we will be really well positioned to take advantage of that. And so I think Middletown acting on its own, it would be very challenging, maybe doable. I think that with the money and the incentives that are going to be coming into states and towns from the federal level, now that we have an emphasis on this, now that we have a political climate, so to speak, where there are things that are going to move forward on this, probably not at the scale that I would like, but certainly a huge step from where we have been for a pretty long time on this. And so I think it is achievable. I think that as we're starting to look at replacing all fleet vehicles going out of service with electric vehicles where that's possible. We have the first electric school bus in the state of Connecticut, fully electric school bus, and that came about again through a really collaborative process where state funding, the state is providing grants with its settlement money from the Volkswagen lawsuit, and that grant money came to the city, and our bus operator, DATCO, who operates our school buses, stepped up to close the delta between how much the grant was for and for the cost of the bus. And that's another great example of collaboration. a great example of public and private sector working together on something achievable. But it's also one school bus in a fleet, and there's not always going to be that grant money available. There's not always going to be a DATCO who's willing to write a $100,000 check to make up the difference. And what's going to happen over these next few years is get those products to scale. Get the electric school buses to scale the way we've seen electric passenger cars scale up and go from being very remote in availability and very, very expensive to now being more mainstream and more affordable. So that's the type of transition that I think is going to start happening, that needs to start happening. And the desire to be the first came out of we want to be at the cutting edge, but we also recognize that we're doing it specifically to pilot it, to show that it is possible, so that in a few years we might be able to be one of the first, since adopters in earnest, and hope that others would follow.
Oh, that's great, Ben. I know we have some other questions. Oh, great, Paul. I see you unmuting yourself. Feel free to jump right in.
Sure. Thank you, Heather. Ms. Mayor, have there been any ramifications of your efforts to put Middletown at the forefront of sustainability, both intentional or otherwise, good or bad? If you look at, as you put yourself towards the leading edge, sometimes it's called the bleeding edge. Often it also makes you an easy target for folks. What have you found in terms of the response, both from within your local community and from the other surrounding towns within Connecticut? As you can see, Glenn is very jealous, or Gavin is very jealous from Ridgefield of your silver certification there. So you got to watch out for him.
It's a great question. I mean, I think that the ramifications have been there have been tangible ramifications. There have been things that we've been able to achieve. I think that school bus project, wouldn't have happened if we weren't already on the map a little bit. If it would have potentially gone to another community, but it was in Middletown that people from around the state said, this is where that partnership is going to be possible. This is where we can find the private money to make it work. This is where we can find the people who are going to see this project through from an application standpoint. And so that has been great. I think that we have been able to sort of be an example in some respects, to show people that it might be difficult, but maybe not as difficult as they thought it might be, to try to get some municipal, local level sustainability initiatives underway in their own communities. The ramifications of being on the bleeding edge, as you were describing, I think in any field are that you create high expectations for yourself, and often without, because you're at the bleeding edge, without necessarily always having the plan or the resources at your immediate disposal to meet those high expectations. And so I think that the challenges of this is that there are going to be instances where you don't know what the next best step to take is, and that has been characteristic of these past few months, where since we passed the resolution, where we've really had to work through the question of, so what do we do now? We've been doing a lot of things already, which that's important, and we can't discount all the work that happened that led up to the resolution, and the work that's ongoing, and the things like I said, like having the full-time staff dedicated to some of this stuff. Those are ongoing benefits. But if we pass this resolution, we should be doing something materially different. We should be advancing. We should be taking all of that good work and really building on it in a significant way, and figuring out how to do that, where to begin, is challenging. And that has been what we've been talking about, with that sustainable sort of meeting of the minds group that I was describing earlier, and within City Hall, to sort of figure out what we can do internally to lead by example, and what types of programs we can bring out to the public. So I think that's been it's the ramifications have been, if I can boil it down, it's that good things will come to you. You know, that projects will find you when you're out front, but you don't know exactly when. And so there are going to be moments where you feel a little bit stuck and you feel like you're not doing enough. But by continuing to, I think even the rhetorical leadership, even the non-binding resolutions are important to getting the projects to find you, you know, and finding and getting the people to approach you and get in and want to get involved, who are going to do the work of making those projects happen.
I'm not sure how involved like businesses were in like the making of the piece of legislation that you did, but just any advice for business leaders or people who own businesses in any community on how they can kind of add to the momentum of whatever is already going on, and if there's anything they can do to help the government kind of push forward certain legislation.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the example that I would go to again is that electric school bus, which would not have happened without the support of the business community. And we had, in addition to DATCO, at the announcement for that, we had the president of our Chamber of Commerce for Middlesex County, which is it's an outstanding chamber because it is. I was just talking about this with them earlier this morning. It is a chamber that is way more than a business organization. They do so much community outreach. They do, you know, host panels, they host events for all sorts of different issues. And if I were to, you know, one piece of advice that I might give to businesses looking to try to kind of do the right thing here is, in addition to stepping up in the way that DATCO stepped up, where if you have the means, if you have the resources to you know, spend a little bit of money to advance something that costs a lot now, because we haven't scaled it to the point where it's going to be affordable. Trying to be a leader there, I think, is going to pay off big time. I think it's going to pay off for your bottom line, just in terms of straight dollars and cents. But I think it's also going to put you on the map as a business that cares about sustainability. I think that this was great press for DATCO, in addition to being a great investment in their own business model and in sustainability in Middletown. And I would say, you know, to the point about chambers, to have businesses get involved with their local chamber and with other business organizations and try to bring up sustainability as something that business organizations should be focusing on. I think that, right, you know, I testified on a couple of bills that are before the legislature, on one on the Governor Lamont's proposal to the transportation, to join the Transportation Climate Initiative. I was struggling to remember what TCI stood for a second. But another on testifying in support of making changes to the bottle bill that has more to do with recycling than with emissions. But in both cases, it was sort of institutionalized business groups that were kind of fighting against those things. And there's always going to be an industry, a sector, a particular type of business who is going to be negatively affected by these types of policies. I think that is sort of an unfortunate reality, and a big reason why action, you know, at the level that is needed has been delayed for so long. But I think that businesses who can benefit from sustainability investment and who want to be at the front edge of that should be talking to the business community in general about, you know, how do we make this good for business? How do we try to support what's happening in our community to keep it healthier and to keep it safer? How do we think about what a transition would look like for some of the industries that would be affected? And I think that right now, at least, sustainability projects are good business, and to try to raise the profile of that fact, you know, and get people to start identifying businesses more with these efforts in a way that maybe they really identify these efforts with the activist community and with elected officials more so now, I think that can only be a good thing.
Great, thank you so much. James Soledad, I see that you unmuted. Do you have a question?
I do.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just thinking about this theme of collaboration between the public sector and businesses, and I'm thinking, Sustainability Connecticut that has this big umbrella, but then each town, I'm based in Westport, and I know that Sustainability Westport is doing a lot in terms of with great initiatives, and I'm thinking about how does it work in terms of collaboration between the different towns, if there is a way, how does it work in terms of what works, what doesn't, what can we learn from each other from a state point of view?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it applies to so many different issues beyond sustainability. But one of the things that we struggle with in Connecticut is that towns don't really talk to each other. Because of our sort of unique structure where there's no county government, and we've got 169 distinct municipalities. Everybody's kind of doing their own thing most of the time. And it often doesn't even occur to towns neighboring each other to sort of talk about what could we be doing collaboratively, what might we do together to make it more cost effective and efficient, and what are you doing that we can copy? What are your best practices that we should be doing here in our community? And that's very real. And I think that there are institutions, there's groups that are set up like the CCM, which is the Connecticut Conference for Municipalities, and we're all each town is part of a council of governments that they work on mostly transportation oriented regional projects with, but that's a barrier. I mean, that is sort of a structural obstacle to getting the good things that are happening in the towns and cities to start happening at the statewide level, and to start being adopted as common practices amongst the cities and towns. But I'll give an example of something that I think was really effective. This was on waste management, which has a lot to do with the climate crisis. The state of Connecticut has a waste management crisis on its hands, where the plant, the trash burning plant in Hartford that serves a huge chunk of the state's population is at this point months away from being totally out of commission, and we have to find a solution. And part of that solution has to do with what do we do with the waste when it gets picked up from the residences and from the businesses. Are we gonna build a new plant? Are we gonna find a new, more sustainable way to handle waste? Are we gonna have to do things that are not sustainable, like truck it out of state, for a period of time before we come up with a solution? But there also has to be a solution on the production of waste side, and try to actually get our recycling systems working better, to try to get people to not throw as much away, and to reuse and to reduce waste. And the state Department of Energy and Environmental Protection put together a sort of working group that I was part of to try to answer this question. What they did was they put all of the towns and cities together. I co-chaired the sort of recycling, the group that was focusing on recycling with Laura Francis, who is it's another bipartisan working relationship. She's a Republican first selectman in Durham, which is right next door to Middletown. And we tried to bring together all these different towns, and then bring in outside people, many from out of state, to sort of talk about what are your best practices, and what could we be doing in Connecticut to do more. So it's like it has to be a very conscious thing, because it is just sort of not in our DNA when it comes to how government is structured in this state, to have towns talking and working together. And so DEEP had to take the initiative to get that off the ground. But once it was off the ground, the dialogue was great, and the idea sharing was great. And if you look up, it was called CCSMM, if you Google that acronym, you'll find some information about what was discussed and what the next steps are going to be. So it has to be a conscious effort, but once the conversation actually starts, it can be, I think, really productive. And we got to be doing more of that and creating more, trying to change that institutional, structural element that prevents it from happening in the first place.
Oh, Mayor Florsheim, thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you join us today. I do have to say that this is the end of today, but it's really the beginning of the conversation. And I'm so thrilled that you were able to come in and be introduced to our community. We'd love to hear feedback. If there's anything that we can do to help in any kind of a way, we're definitely here to support you in all the great efforts that you're doing for Middletown and your future efforts for the whole world. So thank you everyone for joining. Special thanks to Christia and Allie and Eleanor, and Glenn and Gavin and our other board members. Thank you so much for all that you do. And keep your eyes peeled in your inbox for an invitation. In 2 weeks, we'll gather again as a community. So Glenn, I will pass it over to you for any closing remarks.
Thanks, Heather and Ben, for your generosity and your infinite wisdom when it comes to managing through local government. And, we are particularly grateful. We knew that in the early days of COVID, in the vacuum of federal leadership, a lot of issues descended upon the mayors. And I know there's been a tremendous churn rate, and you were probably thinking at the time, gee, this is a really bad timing to enter this level of government. But we are very grateful for your thought leadership, your commitment to public service, and the way you articulate your ideas is particularly enlightening. So we're grateful for you to be in this community, and we support what you're doing. And thank you for your generosity and sharing your wisdom.
Thanks so much for having me, and really glad that these conversations are taking place, and hope to be back again, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.